Rodrigo Montenegro is my guest on this 9th episode of the LAB Parlor, which is also the first episode in English. Rodrigo has worked in consciousness research with prestigious institutions and is currently carrying out research on gifted OBE subjects. In particular, his research deals with the neurophysiological correlates of the out-of-body experiences and also of so-called vibrational states, proposing an extended phenomenological approach and new explanatory models. He is also carrying out research on the neuromodulation of OBEs through precise multifocal transcranial electric stimulation. And he is also pursuing innovative investigation on psychedelics such as DMT, considering their potentials and limitations for the induction of OBEs. But without any further ado, here's my conversation with Rodrigo, who, by the way, is also proposing a workshop here at the lab, so I invite you to look in the video description for more information about this important happening. Rodrigo, so welcome to Lugano, to the lab.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, first time here in Lugano for you.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, so
very beautiful place.
And we met a very long time ago.
Indeed.
In let's say physically at least. I don't have remembrance of meeting you in any other plane.
Well, no, me neither, but I don't even recall when was exactly the first time we met.
Yeah.
But I remember possibly the last time. This was in 2015, I guess.
Something like that, yeah.
But the first time it must have been in one of those courses we were
you were teaching in IASC.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I knew you because you were an instructor of the International Academy of Consciousness, which I got in contact in 2004, start following all their classes, and you were one of the instructors. And actually, if I'm correct, one of the founder also of you were there at the very beginning.
Yes, I was there at the beginning. Actually, I started really, as a volunteer in 2000. Yeah. So it was really December 1999 when I came in London, and I was a volunteer already with the International Institute that was associated with Valdevier, Dr. Valdevier. And so, because IAC was born of the IEPC, International Institute of Projectology and Conscientiology, I was a volunteer of that institution. And then when we became IAC, of course, I became one of the founding members of IAC as well.
Do you remember, maybe I told you once how I knew about the existence of IIPC and then IAC. This happened because it was I think 2000, around there, I did a channeling with a channeler called John Fox, in American channeler. And during that channeling, the entity, the presumed entity who was speaking with me, called the Master Hilarion. I don't know if you never heard about that.
No.
And he said, it's very good for you. You should start gathering more information about energy work, and particularly the vibrational state. And he explained me how to do the vibrational states. And then you said you should come into contact with institutions like the IIPC, and the entity Hilarion said, I don't know if where you are now they are already opening offices or no, but it will come. And so
interesting.
It was very specific, and I said, and then it took me 4 years to go from that information to actually apply.
To answer the call,
but there was no office at the time, just starting, So in 2004, I think it was when I started following classes, and then I met you as one of the instructors. And so it's quite interesting. And so you are still pretty much deeply involved in this fascinating topic, which is out-of-body experiences, which is the reason why you are here at the lab today, because this evening you are going to talk in a conference about the science, out-of-body experiences, and what science knows about it or doesn't know about it. And I'm very much interested. And also I invited you to offer a workshop. It will be next month here, 2 weekends workshop with a lot of, I'm sure it will be full of invaluable information.
I hope so.
Since I know you already at the time, it was a different context, of course. You were already providing a lot of interesting information, interesting opportunity to try to experiment in first person this phenomenon, because that's what we need to do. And so it's your workshop will be, if I remember well, like it's in 2 weekends and 20 hours of theories and 10 hours of experimentations, and so it will be very intense. And I'm looking forward to participate myself to your workshop and see if I can unlock a little bit more of my possibilities,
of the mysteries.
Absolutely. And yes, and I was thinking that we are a little bit similar somehow. Of course, we are very different for many things, but we have this similar characteristic of being taking, let's put it like this, taking very seriously science and very seriously let's call it spiritual research, for lack of a better word, but I mean inner research, or so we take very seriously the phenomena we can experience when we are in altered state of consciousness, and we tend to value them take it for, not to describe everything necessarily as a hallucination. And so we kind of understand well the inner research domain, but at the same time we also work as scientists, and so we also understand very well the other side, and this put us in a kind of very special peculiar situation, which we are either, I don't know if I told you once, so we are kind of like black sheep, but double black sheep, because both fields do not like us very much.
No. I mean, I have to say that certainly I completely agree with you with the fact that we certainly need to increase our understanding, scientific understanding, using the tools of science to understand psychic phenomena, consciousness. And at the same time, and I think that's, the prevalent, condition, we are specifically experiencing the other part of that. It's not just like the objective study of, the scientific study that is important, but also understanding it subjectively with the objective lenses of science. And I think that we can consider ourselves as a little bit of the black sheep of both teams, because we do too much science in one group and not enough science, or it's not enough scientific. But I think that today certainly the scientific community is much more open and receptive to understanding, looking at least at those phenomena with the lens of science. But what is missing there is that we see a lot of scientists that have really good, scientific knowledge, but no subjective, no experiential knowledge, and that's very true for all body experience. So we see very interesting studies, but that lack, the perspective of enlightened perspective that would be the one coming from someone that has lived and has experienced that, right? And I think that's really, the dichotomy that we are in. We have, a group of people and community that have a lot of experience, but do not necessarily engage into a more scientific prospect in which they are more critical about their own experience and integrate scientific knowledge to try to limit the biases that we have with those subjective phenomena, and try to be more lucid, aware, critical, and apply more reason to the understanding of the subjective, self, and the subjective, those subjective phenomena. And I think that integrating those are really what, it's important. Integrating the phenomenology, looking at it with a microphenomenological lens, and then doing science with it, hard, pure science with good protocols, where we really use the tools of science as a means to increase our knowledge. And that's my purpose. It's like, as you were saying, I have certainly experienced out body experiences for now a long time. This is what led me to those institutions, because I saw that they had gathered a certain amount of knowledge, a certain level of knowledge that was interesting. But at the same time, I feel like when I left, at least, some of those institutions, I felt that we were not engaging enough with the hard science part of it.
Yeah, because engaging with hard science is accepting, first of all, the limitation of hard science, which is like, I just approach a certain question in a well-defined way, so I can gather very information that you can trust. Maybe it's limited, but it gives you some points on which you can find a path where, okay, this we understand, maybe it's a little. But on the other side, we still need this broader perspective of taking the richness of these phenomena seriously, because otherwise we end up doing a kind of science which is very reductionistic, not very useful to, because it misses the point of what we are really talking about.
And I agree with that, because it becomes completely reductionist, in the sense, like, for example, when we're studying the vibrational state, we know from some surveys that there is like about maybe 40% of people who have experienced OBEs that will perceive the vibrational state. This, for the viewers that do not understand what is the vibrational state, this is a phenomenon that is perceived at the onset of the out-body experience. Not always, not always perceived, but it's there. 40% of people can report it based on survey, maybe less, maybe more, doesn't matter. The fact is that even if it was 10%, or even if it was 5%, this should be taken into consideration. But when we look at all the studies of OBE so far, none of them are talking about peer review studies. I'm talking about. None of them are talking about a phenomenon that is so important, that is so interpenetrated by the out-body reality. So a lot of people will perceive some sort of vibrations. And so how come it's not there? And that's the problem. It's because there is a reductionist perception of this, to say, oh no, this is not possible, because they never felt it, they've never experienced it. So there is an opening to the phenomenon itself, but is as much as one's perceptions goes. And so the subjective reality, we say that we are objective in science. We are not objective. We are objective based on our perception of reality and what we have perceived. And so there is a lack in the scientific community of experiential knowledge. If you are studying those things, and although it may sound a little bit contradictory in terms of science, we need to have some type of experience, because what we see is we see a lot of scientists studying, for example, meditation, and they have practiced meditation for 10 years, 15 years. But those who study OBEs, they haven't practiced, or at least they haven't experienced this. And so that's a lack in itself, because there is a lack of understanding of really the tapestry that is within this experience.
Well, I think also OBEs are kind of peculiar in themselves because meditation, for instance, you can study meditation or even practice meditation, still remain in a framework which does not contradict the main metaphysical materialism viewpoint, which dominates, unfortunately, science, kind of saying everything we experience is generated by our brain and by we live in a three-dimensional reality with so and you can still even explain these deep experiences as a meditator as a special activity of your brain. You don't even have to talk about other reality which would exist beyond the ordinary one.
But Massimiliano, I think that we don't need to accept a metaphysical reality to experience or to be open to the experimentation. It's like, for example, if you are like having a virtual reality experience, right? It's just an experiment. You don't need to accept that it leads necessarily to a metaphysical state for you to start to study what it is.
Oh, sure.
And so, yes, in my opinion, inevitably you will probably be confronted with that reality, and you will necessarily need to accept it. In the sense that accept that there is something beyond the normal confine of our perception happening there. But it doesn't mean that you could not, even if you wanted still to stay a materialist, to say, oh, this is a metacognitive kind of characteristic. Let's say, for example, metachoric. They use that term to say, oh, this is a reality that was created by your own mind, right? So fair enough. But what I'm asking those scientists is really to start, putting themselves, lying on the ground, doing some exercise to see what it is, to feel what it is, because you have some, for example, scientists today say, oh, this is an hallucination. But obviously they have never felt, they have never perceived what it is to have an all-body experience, because they would not say, oh, this is an endogenic, a psychedelic state, because there is no, hallucination that is similar to the ones that we have when we use, psychedelics. So there are some, similarities, but overall it's very different.
But does it feel like an hallucination, for instance? It's a good question to ask.
Yes,
but you need to know the hallucinatory state and the other state. And I think that's one of the things in which you are pretty much involved.
Absolutely,
to compare,
we can talk about it, but the fact remains that, of course, we in science, there is this need to be objective, and to dissociate, the experience with the experiencer, and that's fair enough, and that's important, right? But I think that in any case, as we were saying, we apprehend reality based on our understanding. This is something that Kant, Immanuel Kant was saying. It's like, hey, yes, we have a certain apprehension of reality, but it's based on our sense, and we will consider that reality based on our perception of all that. But if we don't experience meditation or OBE, to have at least an insight, kind of perception, even if it's limited, of what it is, then it's more difficult for us to judge. Because, for example, when someone says to me that, oh, this is a dissociative disorder, I says like, hey, you first of all, you don't know then what is a dissociative disorder. Even if we take, the statistical manual that look at those disorders and define it, you'll see that it's not. And if you look at this and you look at what it is to have an OBE, you'll see that there are actually a lot of differences. So you cannot say that, because it shows that there is a very wrong understanding of what it is to have. And if they had the experience in the first place, they would certainly be more inclined to be a little bit more, I would say, critical about that kind of thing. And I'm not saying that in some case we can have a dissociative state when we are having at least initially in the OB, there might be certain conditions that are more dissociative, like, but this is the rarest of conditions.
Yeah, for sure. No, but okay, science is open to go beyond the let's say the naive way of describing reality. No, science goes beyond senses, try to analyze deeper phenomena, to go beyond the first idea we have of an explanation. We understand that sometimes our explanations are not good explanation, and that's where science try to go a little bit deeper. Now, so I would say it's okay with science to change their worldview from time to time, because of course we go so deep in certain domains that we are obliged to change our preconception about how the world out there works. So of course today we still live in an epoch where most scientists think that essentially reality is what is measured by three-dimensional instruments. We still try to fit everything into space, and of course therefore any phenomena pointing to another space, another reality, has to be by definition hallucinatory. And that's where I think the vibrational state, for instance, doesn't fit really into that narrative, because it's very physical, energetic, and you have a tendency not to associate that with an hallucination. You pretty said hallucination is more like imagery. Why do I have such an intense perception of some real vibration happening at the interface of something? I don't know.
Yes.
I had a very strong experience. The strongest vibrational state I had, it was perfectly spontaneous. I was not doing anything. I was doing a visualization of imagining I was breaking something with two person. I was disentangled them, a visualization. And when I did that, I had this, it was an energetic shower. I don't know what it is, but then it triggered a vibrational state. Was so strong. I was in a normal state before, and the vibration was so strong, I was kind of thinking I was disappearing from the physical domain, and I was looking at the person around me to check if they were really seeing me, because I had this sensation that my body was dissociating, and I had all sort of emotion flowing through me without being problematic. My body was crying, but I was perfectly calm inside, so it was an amazing experience, and I have no means to explain something like that by just saying my mind was hallucinating, because there was nothing to. I mean, it would be a very bad explanation. You can explain. You can use bad explanation, but
and that's the thing with some of those phenomena, is that they are ineffable, but nonetheless. What we see, for example, we were discussing, I'm doing a systematic review of the literature about what people have reported and the characteristics of, what they reported, the emotions, the characteristics of the perception, to see if we can grasp a kind of a typology that would come from that body of, perceptions, right? And so what we see is that there are really characteristics that are prevalent in the experience, and so that's very interesting, and so it cannot be an hallucination, because if it was an hallucination, the variety of the hallucinatory context would be very wide, and it's not the case. It's the phenomenology is very specific. We can even talk about a specificity in terms of the intensity. There is a specific type of report that indicate a certain level of intensity when they're reported. And so that's another aspect. And there's another thing. is that hallucination in itself, we know hallucination disorders, for example, in psychiatry, they are not proprioceptive, generally speaking. They are not interoceptive, meaning that they are not often associated with body-like sensations.
Yeah.
They are more auditory or they are more visual,
exactly.
right? And so, again, if we would look at, contextualizing this from a scientific perspective, say, hey, we have a phenomenon here that is unusual, different, or people are saying, look, it's so real, it's so clear, it's electric. Sometimes people are in the middle of the night, they wake up because they felt like they were electrocuted. So it's that intense of a sensation. And so the first thing that comes to mind to the general, knowledge, perception of what it is, it's an hallucination. But hey, hold on a second. If it was an hallucination, then we would not have this specificity in terms of the phenomenology. And that's the first thing that is not being done. We are just discarding the phenomenology again in a reductionist way because simply we haven't looked at the data. I'm doing like any other scientist, looking at the data and trying without any preconceived ideas, trying to look at this objectively and saying, hey, what are people reporting? What are they saying that they have had? And okay, from this, can we accept our current knowledge of it? Does it correlate well with what we have, so far? Because that's we were talking about science. The objective of science is also to look at the theories that we have had and if they confer to our current understanding and current methodologies. Right? So, for example, you were talking about something that is very interesting. You perceive a dissolution of the self. And that's something that is not very peculiar and not very often perceived during the vibrational state, right? But when we look at old traditions, we see that, for example, the Tibetan, they would try to induce very similar state where they would increase this kind of subtle energy, through different means, briefing. But the end result of that increase activation of the energy was the dissolution, right?
Yeah.
And so that's something that, as I told you, I wanted to study.
I'm a guy of Tibetan memories, probably somehow.
Yes, possibly. But the interesting thing is that, for example, when we are most of the time talking about the vibrational state, we don't see those variables, right? And for me, when we look exactly at the neuroscience of it, we could understand, we could start to see why that is the case, right? Because in the brain we see something that is very specific and that has never been reported by anyone claiming to be able to induce the vibrational state, which is a state exactly of kind of possibly a type of non-pathological dissociation with the body. Because the brain has, we know a little bit about the characteristic of dissociative state in terms of the neurophysiology of the brain, and that's what we see. At least we can hypothesize that it's something akin, similar to that. And so maybe there would be a way to use the vibrational state to go beyond that simple condition of the vibrational state. And again, we come back to science, scientific endeavors, and also why I was a little bit a dissident of conscienciology and up to a certain point with IAC later. Why? It's because I thought we didn't engage, at least conscienciology did not engage with experimental science, right? And so it's all very well to be in the experiential side, and it's important, and they do this, well enough, I would say. But we need to apply, experimental science and use the tools of science to gather novel knowledge, but also to test our understanding and the limit of what we know. Because without that, you see that without that knowledge maybe of what's happening in the brain during the neurophysiological correlates of the brain when we are in the vibrational state, we would not necessarily come up with those ideas that would lead want to think, oh, but this is a dissociative state.
Yeah.
Because you don't necessarily objectively perceive these details. You perceive a lot of things, right? But there are some things that maybe were oversighted in the process. And that's why science is important, because we need to test. We need to have variables. We need to have those independent or dependent variables that we need to test for us to be able to increase our knowledge of those things. And that's what really I'm doing with, the Sleep Consciousness Institute. Sleep Consciousness Institute is the institution I've created when I left, IAC. Years later, because I felt the need to re-engage with, coming back to, study, pure formal study. And this is why I did neuroscience, I did medical neuromodulation and then sleep medicine, because I felt the need, for us to go back to the basics, go back to the drawing boards, right? So what do we know? What are the knowledge that we can say we have, we are confident about, right? And what are the limits of those knowledge, right?
Exactly.
And I think that what's missing today in that field is, institutions that are well versed and knowledgeable about the phenomenology, that understand, that have lived the experience, but at the same time have a very good grasping of science, and that they can confront the two and say, okay, what blossoms of that? What is the because some of the experience that people say to me, I say, look, the first thing I will look at, in terms of, parsimony of science, like, hey, this looks like more like a phenomenon that we know in sleep medicine that is associated with this or that, right? Rather than first looking at...
also to distinguish the genuine phenomena from those which are evidently also hallucinatory, because hallucinations are also very present in our mental activity.
I wouldn't use necessarily all the time the word hallucination, but constructions
of images of
perceptions that we create and that we feel comfortable with, right?
But for instance, I know, for instance, in the ancient tradition, the term visualization was pretty much used, and it was not always clear what it was meant with the term visualization. Are we just imaging things, or we are, for instance, really moving things, doing things, even if on a level of reality which is different? Are we just really acting, or we are just pretending we are acting? We just create images. So am I thinking about moving, let's say, a para-arm, an arm which is not physical? Is it true? Or I'm really perceiving some energy which, I perceive a field which is moving. And in the ancient tradition, the term, I think, visualization was more used in reference to the actual movement.
Reality.
So it was, and we now, modern human, interpret it as creating images, which is more, so there's a lot of confusion also at that level.
But even in neuroscience, for example, you have networks that are associated with, the occipital area, that are representation, in images that represent a reality, right? And so we see this, for example, when we analyze, the neurophysiological correlates of the vibrational state. There is very low activity on the occipital area, the primary areas, but there are secondary areas that are correlated, that are activated. So what does that mean? That when you do the vibrational state, do you up to a certain point also visualize? So it's an internal representation,
of course,
right? So those are the things that we need more minutiae. So because a lot of say, we don't use imagination, we don't use visualization. Yeah, true, fair enough. But yes, there is a little bit of an internal representation that is visually correlated,
of course,
right? And so we don't look at this. We haven't looked at this through, and most of those phenomena, we're talking about one phenomenon. In my current studies, I have looked at, just for OBE onset, I have like 20 phenomena with some of them specific neurophysiological correlates. So not all of them, but some of them we have clear neurophysiological correlates that are really interesting, that we need to analyze, that I need time, that I need resources, that I need financing, funding to do this, because otherwise it's not possible. But you can imagine already the complexity, just for the vibrational state, the complexity, the neurophysiological complexity of the brain there, it's out there in terms of brain characteristics. It's really outstanding in terms of the neurophysiological correlates that is associated with the brain. For example, we see increased entropy. Entropy, for those of the viewers that don't know, doesn't mean a negative condition. It's just the complexity of the signal is more important if we compare the baseline from when we have the vibrational state. So that's one of the things. And we see a hyperconnected brain as well. We see delta wave, gamma waves that are coming together. So when we achieve the vibrational state, we have an increase in delta and gamma wave at the same time. And in delta is very, very specifically a condition that is very peculiar there in the brain, because we see, first of all, a heightened increase. So there is about 400% increase from the baseline to the vibrational state or in the delta wave, but this is all over the brain. So what it is, so we need to decipher that condition, because there is not a lot or there is no conditions that we have seen where there is a high prevalence of delta wave like this in a state such as this and in such a short period of time. Right. And so yes, to come back to how complex it is and how it enlightens our understanding of what we are living, and also provide us with ways to focus our training to achieve the vibrational state better, because some of this knowledge can be gathered to give knowledge and a perception of how it is to achieve that state. And so that's what we are doing as well with the Sleep Consciousness Institute. Most of the techniques that we teach are based on the experimental. It's not only anymore, okay, we have look at the phenomenology, we know it's like this, we're going to use these techniques, fair enough, we know in the past that it worked. No, now we have tested the techniques, we know experimentally the effects that they have, and now we propose them for people to use them, because we know based on the experimentations that they work, and they work because of that.
Oh, that's very interesting. Also because sometimes many techniques have been passed on through time. They become mythological almost. You don't have to change them because they are, some of them even sacred, because coming from times immemorable. So for instance, when we talk about yoga techniques, very specific pranayama, pranavidya techniques, then you have this idea that they were transmitted by very advanced beings. So of course they were, which is probably also, it might be the case that some of them were in fact conveyed in a very precise way, and they are based on a very detailed knowledge of not only the physiology, but let's call it the paraphysiology of the human being. But times change things. We don't even know if we have preserve certain information in a correct way. So we need to use all the instruments of our time as well. And what I like of your approach, of course, is that, let's say you are a neuroscientist of a very peculiar, very unusual kind, because you are not looking into the brain to demystify fully, to say, oh, these phenomena are just brain phenomena. They are just, they are generated by the brain, and so I will look at the brain to demonstrate that. Many times people say, oh, if I find that there is a correlate, so it means it's brain generated. Of course, it's a logical mistake, and it doesn't. it doesn't mean that the brain is can be seen as an interface, and of course it will have certain specific pattern where certain things happen. Doesn't mean that the brain is at the origin of or only at the origin of the observed phenomenon. And here I come back to the fact that it's important that scientists can be, of a new kind, have more personal experience with the phenomena, because then I would say something which is very important is the following. If I have a certain experience, let's say if I am out of the body, I am very lucid, I really perceive a reality in a very tangible way, which is not the usual one. I am not, it has the same quality of reality of my usual reality.
Yes.
Now I come back with that experience. I even, perceive some vibration and all sort of things. Now what I can do as a good scientist is, say, listen, I don't know for sure. Maybe there are new kind of hallucination. I wasn't, I don't know, the hyper lucid one. I don't know. Who knows? But if I am honest enough, I have to say, okay, I need to be a little bit more speculative now, and maybe in my attempt to understand this new data, I can hypothesize that maybe reality is a little bit bigger than what I was expecting. And if, for instance, I start thinking, but okay, maybe I'm not just this body, but maybe there are other instrument or vehicle of manifestation, and maybe they are interconnected with that one in some strange way. If I just use this as a hypothesis, I will access the possibility of asking questions, but I would never ask otherwise.
Yes.
And take advantage of experimental situation, of technique. So, because the very simple example is putting an image in a position where the person cannot see it from the position of the physical body, but if you are out of the body, in principle you can see it. It's very simple to implement, but you need to ask the question.
Yes.
If of course you are sure that there is no extra physical reality associated with the human being, you will never do that. You will perceive yourself just stupid doing that.
Yes.
But if you had enough experience to say, it's a possibility, then you can ask that question and you can create experience for that.
Exactly, that's exactly what I was going to say. But coming back to what you were saying about, how the brain may trigger those experiences, because that's an important question, and that's an important thing to conceptualize better. So I am of, I'm a proponent that although, OBs are extremely complex and there are many different pathways that lead, or different techniques that can lead one to experience OBs, that there are triggers that are associated with neurophysiological mechanisms, right? Yeah. And so, for example, that's what we see with, the temporal parietal junction, the TPJ, right? So that has been proposed as, a way to explain out-body experience, because this is based on, experimentations that were coming from Olaf Blanke and others before him, that led to, that were in fact coming from the stimulation of, that area of the brain where patients of Dr. Olaf Blanke, perceive the, out-body experience. The out-body between brackets, because they were, in some cases, they were talking while they were having this experience, right? So that's not occurring in the OBs. But that's interesting, because in the same way that we can experiment with setting targets and trying to hypothesize in the reality of, this phenomena, those phenomena, we can also do the same with, the current state of knowledge of the neuroscience and what is accepted. So it's today very well accepted that, OBEs are, particularly in certain cases, triggered by increased activity or a paradoxical activity of this area that leads one to perceive, itself out of the body.
Yeah.
And so my question was, okay, so let's see if we can do the same, stimulating similarly as, LAB did, the temporal parietal junction, the TPJ of, participants in my studies.
But this time not inside the skull.
Not inside the skull, just outside the skull, right? Yeah, and just to explain. Yes, no, of course not. And I don't think we would have, any approval to do that. But the fact is that what I wanted to see is this imaginative or not? Is it, does it trigger an hallucination or not? But so I took a group of participants that were confident enough of their experiences and expertise about OBEs and that have had, experience. And I was stimulating the temporal parietal junction and seeing if this would trigger their OBEs, because they could tell me with more objectivity if that was, something that was similar to what they normally experience in their OBEs or not.
Because they have experienced that independently of that stimulation.
Exactly. And so what happened there, and that was also something in the same way that, I learned things with the vibrational state that I wouldn't expect. I learned things that I wouldn't expect with, this stimulation of the TPJ. And so what was really, really interesting is that most of the participants there, they perceived that their ability to go out of the body was improved, that was stimulated by that stimulation. Not that it led necessarily to the OBE. Only one of my participants had an OBE. The other one had a very strong disconnection, perceiving his leg and his para arms or para legs, the astral legs or astral arms out. But none of them perceive, the so-called OBE or the otoscopy that, really Olaf Blanke is talking about.
Meaning seeing from outside.
Yes, exactly. With the center of the self in the body, right? And so that's the otoscopy bit. And in the all-body experience, it's the contrary. The self is out and the physical is stays in the physical, right?
Yeah.
But that was interesting, and so it led me to hypothesize that in fact, the TPJ, this area of the brain, is really important, in the beginning of the sensation of the out-body experience, right? And so that when we stimulate that area, we may create a condition that will lead to a paroxysmal state, increasing the ability of the person to perceive the body differently. Why? Because or perceive the location of the body differently. Why? Because this temporal parietal junction is associated with the area of locomotion, of movement. Mm-hmm. So this is why they were, saying, it makes sense, we stimulate this and people lose their perception of reality. But it's based on a very specific paradigm, right?
Sure.
That is,
I have a single body.
Yeah, I have a single body. But the fact is that independently of accepting any other paradigm, what we see is that it triggers our ability to perceive ourselves differently, and it stimulates the brain to be less confined to the physical habituated reality that the person perceives.
Sure.
And so we, with some other techniques, we can also stimulate the brain to increase the plasticity of this area, so that we allow people more easily to be able to experience that state, right? And so I have had also testing with people who never experience OB, who are desperate for years, that have been trying, and then we stimulate this, and then it's the person that had the legs and the arms going out. So it's very peculiar that, of course, we have a state of the brain that we can control up to a certain point, because one of the other characteristic of the experimentation was to look at the intensity of the stimulation and also minimize the intensity of the stimulation with people who are really expert at going out, right? And to see what is the difference of perception. And so what we see is that in a person that has already the habits of going out, a very simple stimulation will also trigger already a more ease of projection. While others you need to force, you need to continuously, try to stimulate that area of the brain. But I am of, the thought that some of the experiences, the out-body experience, can be triggered by controlling certain mechanisms of the brain. And we're talking about only one. But you remember that, I was proposing as well another mechanisms of, control of the motor functions of the brain. And the peripheral nervous system, so that it would lead to an OB. So that's one of the theory that I have. That is a theory that in fact is not incoherent with most of the theory, because a lot of theories, there are like today about 40 theories that try to explain in one way or shape or form, what it is to have, an OB and why. And so, but they are incoherent with themselves, right? The one say one thing and the other one say, but it cannot be both. But this theory could be a theory that comprehensively could be accepted in all types of state where we would have the induction of the OB state, because the OB state, it can be induced in different types of conditions. There are I don't even remember the number of different states. You can be in a relaxed state. You could be, for example, walking. Some people report this is very rare, very rare. But there are different types. So we have the psychedelic that can induce OBs, but mostly with the hallucination.
This is a chemical, let's say, hacking of the brain.
It's a hacking of the brain.
It's more electrical because you're pointing to some region. But I think, what is interesting is that because of course we can, if we understand ourselves as a more complex entity than the physical body is already extremely complicated. But let's say there is even something so beyond. So we take the hypothesis that we are more multidimensional with more, let's say, at least two vehicles of manifestation which can disconnect. Let's put it like that. And now you could say, okay, so I have many ways to try to produce this disconnective state, this disentanglement, to use a quantum jargon, and so you could say, well, some techniques would really start from the physical body, from the physical brain, and I would say even in the ancient time, many techniques are very physical. They are not at all related to visualizing things, or, for instance, breathing technique. They can be extremely intense. Of course, they will alter completely the chemistry of the brain, and so you are really using the breath in very different way. It can be hyperventilation, for instance, or reducing breathings completely, almost stopping it, but certainly your brain will not function the same way. So I would say that's one of the reasons why in the ancient tradition they were working so much with the physical body. And of course you have more advanced technique where you use, let's say, the mind itself as so it's as if you act from the other side.
I think looking back, right, in history of non-ordinary state, we see that there are, I would say, still 4 kind of avenues that shamans, yogis, and saints, have used to induce, non-ordinary state. So you have the physical, characteristic, you have energetic, you have physiological conditions, right? And so it's we can tap into those potentials, right? I mean, we can say that certain shamans, in the Amazon or elsewhere were using psychedelics to access this reality. Others were using, we were talking about, energetic tools like the Tumo Yoga. Tumo Yoga, by the way, was essentially the basic technique that they would use to achieve lucidity during sleep, right? And so they would use these techniques, increasing, their energy
in general.
In general,
which was helpful also to face cold,
yeah,
but more to have more.
But it was really, when we look at the Naropa, for example, yoga. This yoga was essential to achieve the lucidity in sleep, and it was essential. And for the beginning, but also for what they call the Bardo states, the different Bardo states, including the, what they call the out body state. They have a specific name of which I forgot now. But that's really interesting, and it shows how lucid they were about this, because what we see from, again, the neurophysiology of the vibrational state is that it increases the activity of brain areas that are associated with lucid dreaming.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So there is a correlation. Maybe there is an adaptability of, the brain, or increased activity of those areas, or a plasticity that appears, and that would lead one to be more lucid during the sleep states where REM occur, rapid eye movement, where you are dreaming, and therefore increase the lucidity there, right? And so now we can explain actually why it's not just something that is theoretical and saying, oh yeah, if you do the vibrational state, like some say, you will achieve more lucidity. We know why. We know exactly why. What is the reason behind that?
You have an explanation. From the brain.
And it's not just something that is experimental, right? I mean, yes, from experimentation, you can say, hey, I was in a day there, I was doing so much vibrational state. Then the same night, and that's true for me, I had 3 all-body experiences. But now I can understand why. I can understand why, because it is, very specifically correlated with, what we know there, what we're starting to know, of course, of all those states in terms of the brain.
Oh, it's interesting. It provides a lot of insights, a lot of new ideas, and that is always. It happens always like this when you allow different fields to interact in a very constructive way. There's a kind of mutual fertilization.
Yes, absolutely. And we were discussing about physics and OBE, right?
Of
Maybe
course.
There would be a possibility of having a fertile ground of developing maybe the new insights in physics to understand some of the characteristics of
you could say
the phenomenology of what happens in the extra physical dimensions.
It would be very interesting to see. Well, who knows? Maybe in the next coming decades, new insight in physics might come even by reflecting about these non-ordinary realities. Now, of course, there is a big question, and the question is, is physics, actual modern physics, already having some information which is useful to try to understand a little bit about these experience we have, which apparently are not directly associated with the physical body. When we talk about these energies, this is a very loose word, which has a very different meaning sometimes from physics, because what are these? We say it's something, which is a substantial somehow. It's sometimes I sometimes even prefer to use the term of matters than energies, because it's more like a substance, of different nature, but still substance,
I agree.
And this substance might exchange energies, because energies it's a wider concept. And we tend to forget that even the different forms of energy do not really exist. There's one energy, actually. When we say energy is conserved, because there's only one in physics. But you can have different carriers of energy. And the forms of energy are because energy change carrier. So by changing carriers, actually, in physics we say it's the form of energy, which is a different form. But it's because there's a different carrier. But let's say there is a single substance or let's say simil substance, which is energy, and there's just one. But then, of course, we have a multitude of carriers, and that's the question. Let's say this single energy, which we don't know what it is, but actually we talk about energy, but we could talk about quantity of movement. We could talk about angular momentum. Why just energy? It's because okay, energy is an important physical quantity, but there are so many other physical quantities that have a similar status than energy. So I would say I would enlarge even the concept. When you say I am moving energy, I could say I am moving angular momentum as well. Why not? I mean, because in fact there are so many physical properties that I am dynamically changing. So, but then of course, apparently there are carriers of energy, of angular momentum, of whatever other physical quantity that are not studied by physics yet. Or maybe yes, we don't know, but we have never associated with these phenomena. And well, so this is interesting. We were talking today just for a moment, and I find it was very a curious idea. If I imagine a person which is not in the physical body but in the astral body, only living a given layer, let's say layer of the astral reality. So we are taking for granted that it is an objective physical reality, not physical in the sense of we understand the spatio-temporal physical here, but another physical reality of. And what would be the physics that such a person there with laws that are not exactly the same apparently, what kind of physics will this paraphysicist start developing? Would he find atoms, for instance, or not? What quantity, what principle would he discover, and so on? And of course, we need to find also a way to bring that hypothetical physics with the physics we are developing now. My idea is that, in fact, many persons think that quantum mechanics, for instance, is the way to go, because quantum mechanics has unveiled this, reality which is multidimensional, which is, you cannot really fit it in the space and time, and so on. And so I say, so it must be that reality that person experiencing out of body or deep spiritual experiences are talking about. I am skeptical about that.
Me too.
I'm skeptical because I think that when you are out of the body and you are in a different reality, I think that in this different reality you have classical behavior of certain entity behave classically. And other will behave quantum mechanically. So you will have an astral quantum mechanic, an astral classical physics, in the same way you have here. Because in fact, these theories are just describing different structural possibilities. And I think these different structural possibilities, these different relational properties you can have here, you can have there. What it can be is that there you can have more relation or less of a kind. So there will be differences which explain why you will not experience this domain in the same way. But
I completely agree with you. I think that there is we need to review that perspective that this is a quantum reality, and it has quantum. It can have sometime it can some quantum properties, but it's not the normality. I think that most of the time it behaves, or actually the physicality of it or physics of it is more of a classical kind of a condition. But again, it's not always the case, right? And so I was saying that I would be more of a monist, right, or a paramonist, because I believe that everything is associated with a certain physical reality in those realms.
Well, you could even say because sometimes the word materialist it's like a bad word in some
Yes,
circle.
yeah,
It's not.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I'm a materialist in the sense that I like to think about existence on a substantial basis. So what
Yes.
exists has a substance.
Yes.
So this
yeah.
makes me, in principle, a materialist.
Yes. Yeah.
But I'm not saying that what we usually call matter
Yeah.
is the only stuff
Absolutely.
out there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so you can, a long time ago, I used to invent for myself the word multi-materialist.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm a multi-materialist
Yeah,
in
yeah.
some sense, you know.
Yeah.
Of course, but
I like the classical name of monist, right? Because it's not used so much, but I think that that's really certainly things that we need to look at. For example, one of the things that I really would like to do is like trying to understand how the parabrain or the astral body or the metaphysical body or the parasomatic body that people say, the physical reality that is perceived, entangles with the brain itself, right? And I think that would require us to really have physicians, knowledgeable expert in their field.
Physician or physicist?
Physicist, sorry.
Okay. No, maybe also physician, but
physicians as well, but less, But no, physicists to really look at the properties, because you were talking about for example the phantom limb perception when we have like it's a common kind of theme in the OBE onset, right? So how does that interact? How is the brain perceiving those differences, right? And so and I think again, like in the same way that we have in the temporal parietal junction a doorway of the body, of the out body state, because it is associated with perception of localization and movement. When we are used to disentangle the physical reality with that paraphysical reality and perceive the movement out, certainly we are more prone to perceive the tapestry, the subtleties of the difference between those perceptions. And I think that in the same way we would be able to have characteristics of that perception when we have the para limb going out, because we would be able, possibly it would be the same networks but that have a novel perception, an added layer of perception associated with it. Because even in the physical reality, for example, what controls movement in the physical body, it's also what controls the static atonic condition during sleep, right? So the networks, they are not always only for one thing. Sometimes they are associated with many different things that seem sometimes contradictory, but they are not, they are related, right? And I think that's really the difficulty is that we tend to put everything in one box when it's not. It's like, for example, me, I wasn't very convinced by the fact that simply temporal parietal junction stimulation would induce an OBE, and now I don't think that it would induce necessarily an OBE, but it would help, right? And so based on the data, actually,
which is quite interesting because it's in between, right?
Yes.
When because I don't know if you know, but when Olaf Blanke did this research, I wrote to the journal. It was a journal called La Recherche.
La Recherche, yes.
So there was a popular version of the research published there. And so as a reader, I wrote to the journal, and they published my criticism, saying, wow, why you don't put that, and why you don't try to test if it's a real out-of-body experience. And I was, and they replied, we were not interested in epilepsy, and this, of course, we know it is an ancient question. So it's like we don't have this question because our worldview does not contemplate that question, so we don't do something which is very easy to do, which is very unfortunate. But at the same time, I remember I was wondering, is this, are they really able to trigger a real out-of-body experience? And I was doubtful, actually, as well. I was thinking, precisely also because, because of any lack of reference of energetic phenomena, probably.
But look, there are a few things, right? First of all, patients that Olaf Blank was testing initially were epileptic, as you were saying, right? The participants, none of them were. My participants, none of them were. And there's another difference that is quite important, is that the stimulation that we were using was not intracranial. It was, on the skin of the person, right? Sure. So, and also the level of stimulation was, we only reached 20%, 25% of the setting that was used by Olaf Blank. Yeah. And we still had some effects, right? But
and from the outside.
From outside, yes, from outside. So 25% of the maximum setting of Olaf Blank that was inside. So it's even less, actually. Which of course we cannot compare, right? But it gives you a scale of comparison, right? But that's important because it's like what they're saying is that in epilepsy, when you have like certain epileptic condition where there is a paroxysm of an area that leads to those hallucinations, that's fair enough and that's fine. Yeah. But if we accept that reality, has a new paradigm that we are more than the physical body, then we have to put into context that those pathological condition. Yeah. But it does not mean that there is no physiological correlate that is associated with a certain characteristic of the brain that would be leading or would be predisposing the person to achieve an out body. Because as I was saying, it does stimulate an area of the brain to perceive you less as a physical entity. And that's what is really interesting about this stimulation, is because it's not that you are disrupting, but you are stimulating an area of the brain that shouldn't be so confined to the physical limits that we normally observe as being the reality. We are not the physical body. And so by disrupting this system or stimulating it, because it's not only disruption, those people that didn't perceive hallucination, they perceived that they could shift more easily out based on their appreciation of their understanding of all body state. Yeah. And this is why they were saying, look, this state led me to achieve a condition that normally I rarely reach, because simply it was stimulating this area of the brain so much in a way and that was powerful enough for them to be apt to use that mechanism and to play with it and play with the boundaries of the self. And so that's interesting, and I think that it's a viable way, an easy way to allow people who have never experienced OBEs to achieve a certain sense, a certain understanding. Because also I was using a scale, looking at the different phenomena. As I was saying, I'm studying about 20 phenomena at the OBE onset, and I was like trying to quantify statistically, and survey what they were experiencing. Did you experience that? Did you experience this? And so we can look at, I didn't do the statistic yet, too many things to do, but certainly we have the data and we'll look at what is more predisposing, because that was also one of the limitation of the studies that were done, is that they don't look at the phenomena. It's like they don't look at the vibrational state, they don't look at phenomena that are really at the core of the experience of having an out-body experience.
This is also because they have a definition of what an out-of-body experience is, which is not a good definition.
No, but
just
of course.
Otoscopy, what was free, I don't remember.
Heteroscopy, otoscopy, or but the fact is that I think it goes beyond that. It goes also has to be open-minded enough to look at the phenomenology, right? If you are open-minded enough, you'll look at the phenomenology and look at, look, this is not explained. This is not explained by this theory. And this is why one of the articles that I'm now writing is that I'm looking at all those, 40 theories, and I'm saying, look, those 40 theories don't encapsulate the reality of the phenomenon, because they only look, most of the theories, they look at 2 or 3 phenomena maximum.
But if you look at this from the epistemological viewpoint, it's a disaster. I mean, because of course we are biased. Of course, as humans, we tend to not give too much value to the data which is not comforting our theories. But nevertheless, science advances at some point, almost always, not always, but almost always, because some new data comes. And this data say, hey, explain me, and the usual way you explain reality is not sufficient anymore for that data. So you have to rethink your model of reality, your paradigm, and so on. And this apparently is very difficult to do without that data, because, sometimes you can, some scientists have been able, now I'm talking more about physics, to do Gedanken experiment, so thinking about things. Einstein was many times trying to figure out what would happen if I do that or that. So he was creating new theory by simulating reality in his mind. This is a possibility. If you are good enough and in the good moment, you might discover something through an imaginative and logical rational process. You test things in your... Because you ask question nobody has ever asked, and by trying to answer this question, you find new things. They were available there. But again, if you take quantum mechanics, which is a very profound disruption of our belief systems, this is pure data, which at a certain point said, hey, you cannot deny this data, and you cannot, if your theory cannot explain that, you cannot maintain them. But you can accept they are incomplete, use the word you want.
And look, I agree with you, but I think it's also associated with experimental psychology, right? Experimental psychology, started in, middle of, the 19th century, a little bit before, but then we were right to say, look, we need an experimental setting. And in the experimental setting, what we need is to have, specific variables, the independent variables and all those things. And so this process that was a process that were coming from theosophy, spiritism, and even movements of different philosophers, that were experimenting with, triggering like hypnosis and all those things, mesmerism.
Milton Erickson.
That was later. But then but you're right. Milton Erickson said, look, we need to, in the case of hypnosis, we need to look at this more specifically, right? And so having an experimental setting, right? And so that reduced, a little bit, the perception. We, instead of looking at the whole, we were looking at specificity. And so that's the problem that we have today. There is a reductionism that has not comprehensively looked at the complexity of those phenomena, as any phenomena. And I believe that we are coming back slowly. The science, neuroscience specifically, is moving away from that very specific reductionist kind of experimental setting to be more open-minded, or at least accept the fact that, hey, we are doing that specific testing with a specific protocol, but we are not understanding everything. And we see, for example, today, even in near-death experiences studies, there is a little bit of more opening towards the understanding of phenomena that are associated with this. But that's what is missing today, certainly in OBE, research. Is like we don't understand. People who study this, they don't understand. There are still some studies that say this is a schizophrenic state, right? This is not so long ago. There was someone that was saying, "Oh, this is a schizophrenic state." The other one is some people continue thinking that this is a dissociative state. It's not that simple, right? And because again, the two states, when we look at them, they don't compare. Dissociative disorder and OBE states, they don't compare.
Yeah. But yes, I mean, of course, you have at some point to give value to this data, to take it as good data. Maybe some data is underestimated precisely because it's not taken. I mean, again, we come back to what we said in the beginning, which is if more scientists have first-person experience, they can be more interested and give more importance to certain data and you perceive the complexity and then start to reflect back and say, okay, but now I cannot use the usual way to explain these things. We need to come out with new things. We need to be bold. Yes. Because reality asks us to be a little bit bold. And by the way, it's not forbidden in science to be speculative also. Even when you advance explanation, you can be speculative. Yes. It's the only thing you have to do is when you are speculative, you announce it. And now I am more speculative in my attempting to explain certain things. But you open a new discussion, then some will argue and so on and so on. And also people forget about the fact that science is not only about measuring things, collecting data, but it's also finding the most powerful explanation. Yeah. So I feel
that fits best to the data, to the phenomenon.
Science is about. Of course, you can define it in so many different ways, but it's a problem-solving process, and the problem is always an explanatory gap that you need to fill. And so new data provides gaps in explanation, and you need to find explanations. Yeah. And of course, you can always have lazy explanation, ad hoc explanation. They are not very interesting. You need the powerful one. And the powerful one is those who have explanatory power, and scientists know what it means. Well, the point is that, again, it's difficult because, of course, it's like a fabric. Explanations, intertwine, they connect each other. And it's very difficult when to modify one explanation because they are all connected to each other. So to find an explanation for a reality which is out of the body, but still not destroying all the other explanations which have worked well to describe many other phenomena. Well, so you can feel what is the menace there. You are threatening the entire structure, And
it makes me think that we have to remember as well that, for example, Olaf Blank's theory is not wrong in itself, right? And some of what people say about dissociative state related to OBE is not wrong either. Yeah, it's just that it doesn't apply for every experience in itself. Exactly. And so it's I think it's important to point that out because in some cases what they experience is more dissociative in nature and not actually OBE. And the same we were referring to schizotypic kind of personality. Yes, some of them experience nothing at all. It's just in their imagination. But that's not OBE either. So when someone says OBEs are associated with schizotypic personality. Yeah, there may be, but that doesn't mean it is OBEs. Sure. And again, we have to define a better way to look at the phenomenology and to encapsulate from a scientific perspective what it is really to have an OBE, because that's what's missing. We don't have a scale for OBE state. Right, we have a scale for near-death experience, so that we can say, was there really a near-death experience? But we don't have this for an OBE, and that with those, phenomena, those 20 phenomena of OBE onset, I'm trying to provide a beginning of what would be, you know, a scale that would be, you know, available for others to use, and to say, hey, is this guy that we are testing here really saying, you know, that is just having OBE is just saying, or is it really the true experience? Because an expert like myself, I would know.
Yeah.
Because of my experience, because of my expertise, because of my knowledge, because I know the science, I know, you know, the
But you have to
characteristics of it, and I know also how to differentiate. But of course, I come from, you know, an experiential point of view, and I think that again we come back to what we were discussing just now, you know, about this necessity of, you know, having, you know, the experience, because there is, I think, a kind of a mythology in science that researchers cannot have participatory, you know, research. And it's true, it's a fact, you cannot participate in research when you are doing the research, although I know some that do, but it doesn't mean that you cannot experiment. Most of the pilots, I don't know any scientist in neuroscience, you know, that haven't tested the pilots that they, you know, were trying. That you try on yourself the pilot,
you mean pilot study.
The pilot study,
Yeah.
you know, because you want to see if it works, if it's well designed, if it, you know, is tailored to test what you are testing, the variables that you are testing, and you infer with that knowledge, right? And so it's not only reason pure. It's just like, you know, again, we come back to Kant, you know, the criticism of pure reason. It's just not a science that is only associated with reason. And it's important, the reason needs to be there, right? The logic needs to be there. But you need to look at what it does, what it's, and that perception of the sense that you can, you know, have when you are testing yourself, you know, in the pilot, or testing yourself what it is to have an out-body experience, provides insight. It doesn't need to be, you know, the final reality that you have accepted, but it gives you an insight into the things that you are doing. And I think that having, you know, people that have, you know, expertise in out-body is necessary to proceed with more research with OBE. In the same way that we use meditators that have 10 years, 15 years, 20 years of experience, and we don't only, when we do those research with them, we don't only say, oh, we are going to do this. We ask them, hey, do you think that you know, protocol of research here encapsulate the experience that you are having? Because they provide us with insight, but we have most of the time the insight of this experience ourselves because we have tested this. But with OBE, we need to have more insightful experiential knowledge to be able to propose things that are really tailored to understanding and test those realities.
Now that you are talking about that, I was thinking about in the domain of physics something which is kind of similar, and then I have to be critic of myself as well in that. Is that, but for instance, you have the theoretical physicist and the experimental physicist, you know. And in the past, they were much closer, you know, because physics, first of all, was less complicated, of course, and so you still had, you know, scientists which were very good theoreticians, even mathematicians, and very good experimentalists. Fermi was, Enrico Fermi, probably one of the last of that kind, which were kind of expert in both in the experimental physics and in theoretical physics, so dominating really physics in all aspects. But then, of course, as time passed, you know, theoreticians today are more and more disconnected from what happened in the laboratories, and vice versa. And the land in between, it's a very strange land where little, you know, there are some person which try to bridge somehow these two worlds, but you have theoreticians that of course they talk about, and I am among them, talk about measuring the position and measuring certain observable and certain event, but we don't have a clue how this happens in a laboratory anymore because it's too complicated, and we rely on the expertise and the art of the experimentalists when they do strange things there, and we believe them, and they believe us somehow that we provide with a good question sometimes. But I see there a little problem as well. That is a disconnection again, which in a certain way, if some theoreticians were more knowledgeable about how in practice certain things are really measured, they would probably offer explanation which are less far apart maybe from what is the good explanation, because we start little by little creating reality on themselves. Think about quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics has developed, you have a formalism, a mathematical formalism, which is called sometimes the standard formalism, and then it's a beautiful mathematical formalism, and you have the impression that everything is contained there, and everything is true, so you just have to reason inside, and you don't have. So if something is true there, it has to be true also in reality. Today we were talking together about entanglement, and I was telling you that entanglement is not a good explanation about telepathy, because if you look at quantum mechanics, you see that in quantum mechanics some equalities have to be respected. They are called no signaling relations, and we take that for granted. But then, not very some years ago, I discovered, and I was really puzzled by that everybody talks about the fact that quantum mechanics cannot be used for telepathy because of these called no signaling condition or marginal laws, so they have different names depending on the context. They cannot be violated because the formalist tells you that. But in the laboratory, they are always violated. But these are experimental mistakes. Okay, because we were looking about violating other inequalities, like the Bell's one. Because, for instance, when you try to demonstrate that entanglement exists, you try to violate some specific inequalities that are called like Bell inequality. And so you concentrate your experimental effort on that, then you're not taking care too much about other things, like the no signaling conditions. So you say, but we were not taking care about that, so probably it's an experimental error, because you don't want to put into the question. So now I have the question saying, okay, but maybe even in the laboratory, what the Graal of quantum mechanics tell us that you cannot do actually happens. And people are not reflecting maybe about this information, which would tell you, wait, again, the physical reality is more complex. You can have violation of this inequality because the formalism of quantum mechanics is just describing an ideal limit case, but the reality allows for more complex situation, and some of them in principle would even allow using entanglement for have a transfer of transfer of information. But so just an example, but it was amazing for me that I've been involved in studying entanglement at a theoretical level, not knowing that. I was not aware about the fact that almost all experiment violates these sacred no signaling condition, and nobody seems to care. And probably is because nobody knows.
Yes.
Because the experimentally were not taking that very seriously, and the theoretical physicists were thinking that in any case they are never violated. If they are violated, it has to be an experimental error. Just an example, sometimes maybe you are missing some key
critical data,
that
comes from the field.
Well, I say that because I work in a group which is the Geneva Brussels school. Well, it originated in Geneva, but then it went on in the Brussels University, and I collaborated with Diede Ricazzi, which is one of the guy who really brought this school at the highest level, and they develop a formalism which is much more general than the quantum mechanical one, And in that formalism, it's okay to have violations of these things, because it contemplates a richer structure in reality. So again, I think
It
it's
exemplifies exactly what's happening in the field of neuroscience
somehow,
with very specific kind of theory that do not, or neuroscience or even psychology theories that do not encapsulate the reality of the phenomena. And I think this is why it's important to look at the phenomena from a phenomenological perspective, like Varela, Francisco Varela, did. Looking at it has the fundamental perspective by which we can look at the neuroscience and the different theories that we can provide. But yet I think phenomenology itself needs to be at the forefront and at the core of everything that we do. Looking at phenomenology, looking at even microphenomenology, looking at the detailing that we can have within the scope of a phenomena.
Yeah, great. Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, I think we are in a good epoch to study these phenomena again. Let's say because we have more tools, more technical tools. I think it's a good period because in science we are again able to talk more about that because of consciousness studies, which is an emerging field of study. So in the past we were talking about the soul, the spirit, and so on. There was moment where it was possible to talk about that in science, then it disappeared again and wasn't possible anymore. And now through the back door of the term consciousness, which is more scientific, more acceptable, let's say, we can bring back all sort of phenomena which are associated, of course, because of course we want to understand what consciousness is. And by the way, I don't know if you remember, but once I wrote, in the consciousness study, there was this Chalmers initial papers with the distinction between the easy and hard problem. So the easy problem, which is not easy, is about finding all the neural correlates of mental activities. And the hard problem is about truly understanding, what consciousness is, what qualia, what subjectivity, where it emerged from. And I remember I provocatively proposed to also place in between the easy and hard problem the serious problem. And the serious problem is by taking seriously all the phenomena associated with consciousness. And so it's a little bit what you are actually doing. And I think probably thanks of consciousness study, we are opening a little bit the discussion. It becomes more possible. So it's less heretic to do it, and probably, if it becomes interesting enough at some point, scientific curiosity, and there are a lot of scientists which are intellectually very honest. So if you really convince them about something, I think they can start changing their mind.
I agree.
I still don't understand why, for instance, in physics we are so easy in talking about parallel universes, multiple worlds, deep, whatever, exotic things. And apparently when it's about the human being, it becomes more like a taboo, So there's no par condicio. I mean, we should be able at least
to contemplate the possibility.
To be as, the entire domain of theoretical physics, which are heavily financed. Imagine string theories, no correlate with physical reality at all. Probably is a dead end. It goes nowhere. But nevertheless, it works on itself, and so there it's acceptable to talk like that about things which are completely speculative. And here, apparently, this. I think it's
a good point.
I think it's related a little bit to emotions
and also the
control,
fact that, also the fact that the human is in the equation there, right? So it's more critical. We are talking about human reality,
It
and
affects the way
it affects the way we look at reality.
Personally,
It
yeah,
affects the way people see reality. It affects their belief systems.
we still have
You know?
we're still in a reality where we have the idea that science has to be involved in the study of matter energy in the ordinary sense, and it can do what you want but remain here. Then you have still the religious domain, which are completely separated somehow, so are kind of little two powers, and we don't want an actor which is in between and would somehow again be a double black sheep, because you are, no, I want to maintain my status quo here like that, and here you are, okay, what's that? All of a sudden you bring into science, first of all this religious stuff I don't want, because I don't know how to handle. I have to emancipate myself from that, and now I'm mature enough to be able to integrate all these possibility which the religious guy used to talk about, and they were so irrational and so exaggerated sometimes. And again, the others, they don't want to be reduced to something. Maybe you're going to tell you, this you believe by faith, it's true. Actually, this we can prove it's not.
Exactly.
So you have to again change a little bit your belief, maybe not everything, because at a very metaphysical level, that question are beyond the scope of our investigation. So
absolutely.
But maybe Rodrigo, if you want, and I think we can little by little conclude our conversation. But for people who are listening to us today and arrive at this point, so you are going to provide this workshop, which is again 2 weekends. And so what kind of what are you going to offer to the people who are going to be there? So are you going to talk about in part also your research and the things you have discovered, or is it more traditional stuff? So how you characterize the workshop you are going to give in 2 weekends, most in part theoretical, in part experiential, so people will experiment there as well. So why should let's say I went to IAC beautiful workshop on out of bodies experience and so on, so I had or more traditional yoga style things, and now why should I come? I will come, but why should I come to listen to you and follow?
So I think the workshop has the objective to provide an overview of everything that one should know to experiment all body experiences, right? And so we look at the phenomenology, we dive deep into the phenomenology, and we look at the scientific knowledge that can provide us insight into what it is that is happening. And we also try to achieve a state of mind that is critical but open-minded to the experience, to the experimentation, in the sense that we try to teach phenomenological epistemology, a scientific way for us to deal with our subjective perceptions, in a way that is critical and open-minded, in a way that it looks at what we know, what science know. And so we encompass within the workshop knowledge that is coming from sleep medicine, that is coming from neuroscience, that is coming from psychology, that is coming from psychedelic research, to try to really have a broad understanding of all those associated phenomena, looking beyond the scope of the phenomena itself, but also understanding the mechanisms that explain them, and also providing insight into lucidity out of the body. What is to achieve lucidity? What is the different levels of lucidity? What is the difference with lucid dreaming? People don't understand still this. And there is actually no model to differentiate both. Actually, something that I'm also working on. And so I present a little bit that model there, to try to see, hey, how can you, based on what we know, neuroscience, sleep medicine, achieve, a better understanding of, the experiences that you are having. Let's say, for example, you wake up in the night and you say, oh, is this a OBE? Is this a dreaming? So I provide tools for you to assess this based on what we know today of, the characteristics of those, phenomena. What is, normal dream? What is even a dream? People may not know that, but we also dream in non-REM state. So you have the REM, the rapid eye movement, which is the most, known, way that people think it's the state of the brain when we are dreaming, that when we are sleeping, that leads to dream. But what people don't know is that we have also non-REM, so it's another state of the brain that is different from the REM state, where we also dream. What are the difference in terms of phenomenology? What we know,
it's not known usually.
It's not known, exactly, but it's not known as well as, the different characteristic of lucid dreaming, the types of lucid dreamings that you can have, right? So we look really at the fine grain and tapestry of all those things, giving really the base for any type of experimentation, and for you to understand what it is to have, an out-body experience, and when you are out there, what is the characteristic of the phenomenologies that you may experience, the type of things that you can experience, and so it's really, comprehensive, and most of the techniques that we are used, as I was saying, are based on experimental data. So those are things that we have tested, that we have a little bit of, feedback in terms of, how do they work, and as well as if they are effective and why they are effective. And so we provide insight into, the neurophysiological states, as well as providing why that would lead you to have an LB, right? So we really try to be a bridge between the very serious neuroscientific or even scientific, generally speaking, knowledge that we have about all those states with the experiential, and see where they, encounter and where they fail to encounter, and as well as providing, of course, ways for the person to be able to differentiate, their own bias in terms of, their perceptions, their beliefs, and respecting, of course, any, belief of the person. We are not there to say that we understand everything, but we are just trying to provide tools of self-awareness and evolution.
I look forward to participate, and but just maybe for the lay person, not so much science oriented. Can they still come? I mean, is it so? You will be,
I mean, it's
didactical enough.
No, it's like we go with the flow of, the students. So, if the students look, the course, as you were saying, is 30 hours, 10 hours of practical, experimentation. I could easily talk about any of these topics for 90 hours, and so I try to cater based on the needs of, the students there, trying to assess what really is the, things that they try to learn, they try to, why they came there for, and then we tailor the course based on that, because the fact is that, yes, of course, I've been doing this for more than 25 years, so of course I have a depth of knowledge on those things, not only because I've been studying those scientifically, but because also of my own, experiential experiences, if I can put it that way. But so it's like it's like, for those who would like to come, is like, be prepared to be amazed of, the possibilities, the capacities that one have. Because in most of my course we achieve a good level of, experimentation that is, the kind of, subjective things that people are willing to achieve. and of course, because I have certainly a little bit of the expertise, and I know the tricks, to help people with that. But yeah. So come with an open mind, mind, and be prepared to experience, because I'm pretty sure the people will experience.
So it's grounded on good science, and it's very open-minded, because it contemplates the entire phenomenology of your BE, and you are not you're a monist, not reductionist necessarily.
Exactly.
So you have all kind of models in your head that so you allow all possibility to be.
And
involved.
We explore hypotheses as well. We say, look, we don't know. Simply, we don't know. Maybe maybe even a student would be right when I would think not. So that's the important thing here. Is like we are not into a square, world, inside of a box. No, we explore.
Yeah, it's interesting, because actually I think that you remain intelligible also to the layman, because of course you are not using jargon just for use it, and you will take care of that. At the same time, so I have the feeling that it's very interesting. I mean, even a person with not any specific grasp of science could be, but just interested about the phenomenon of OBE can come.
Yes, absolutely.
And can take a lot of advantage of that. And I think at the same time, even a person with some good understanding of science, even a psychiatrist or even a neuroscientist could even come as well, and have a lot.
And they have actually.
I imagine.
Now I have, because of my scientific background, I have had psychologists, doctors, that have come to the course, because they understand that I can dwell.
Invite them to come.
They of course they should. Scientists, and they come because they understand that I can delve into a subject, for example, of dissociation. I had in one of the last course that I gave, we had a psychologist, and he was very interested in dissociation, and so we were like looking into trying to disentangle the misinformation that there is about those things, what is dissociation and what is not when it compared to OBE, and so now we have in the course that we're giving now in Paris. So we're going to give the course there in Paris in May. We have a doctor, we have 3 psychologists, that are coming. So I mean, it's I certainly.
I think you are the perfect person to bring in also scientists, because you are, sufficiently grounded in science to be. For people to be comfortable. They are not coming to do strange things with strange views. No, you are just very down to earth, with the head far in the sky, but nevertheless, so as a scientist, one can feel, okay, I'm in the right place, because I can have this interesting information, and still, the logical, rational process of try to understand phenomena is there. So and any criticism, inquiry is welcome, and so on. And at the same time, for those who are less have not so many requirements in that sense, the important thing is that you are providing first-hand, up-to-date information about this phenomenon, which is very important, because there are not so many people which are, working at the front of the research. So many people, of course, teach about these things, but they have a knowledge which is always the same knowledge, which has been circulated, which is reproposed in different sauces, salsa,
sausages.
But it's to find new inputs with innovative approaches and so on. This is more rare, and you need need people who are involved in the research. It's the same thing if I explain quantum mechanics and try to I will provide very
grounding.
Not what you usually say,
We start from the phenomenology and we go to the neuroscience, but that's continuous. So every time that we present things, we look at what science has said about it. You see, so you know, it's like it's a comprehensive, you know, movement and continuous movement of, you know, looking at, you know, the phenomenology versus what science says, if it provides or not, because sometimes, you know, science hasn't studied, you know, the phenomena that we are looking at, so it's purely empirical in some cases,
which is good.
And it's fair enough. It's fair enough, but we still look at the data. We still look at what has been said, what has been tested, if anything has been tested, and so we are able to provide a certain consensus of what would be, you know, the case for, you know, a phenomena, what we would be expecting, knowing still, you know, that there is a subjective layer always, you know, above those things.
Good, Rodrigo. Thank you very much for this very nice conversation.
Thank you for inviting me. Very much appreciated.
I really look forward for this workshop and for the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you.